I just want people to know that the freedom is fragile, and we can lose it anytime if we don't defend it. Critical race theory is not anti-racism. It itself is racist. It's divisive, it's destructive, and it is dangerous.
G'day and welcome to episode 43 of The Other Side. I'm Damien Curry. Today we're going to knock the left's beloved critical theory on the head good and hard as we hear about the real history of our nation from a leading Australian academic, and we listen to the American mother who stood up to her local school board and gave them a lesson about the dangers of the fake anti-racism garbage that's being shoved down our kids' throats at school all over the Western world. Get ready for some hard truths, and if you're a lefty checking out our show for the first time, you won't be able to dismiss this as right-wing nutjobs. You'll actually have to do some thinking outside your bubble for once, if you have the guts. I gotta say, if you do, good on you. This is The Other Side. Parents have been rising up all over America in the past month or so, taking on teachers and schools using their curricula to indoctrinate kids with Marxist critical theory-based ideas on gender, race and human sexuality. And it's time we started doing the same thing here in Australia. Change will only come from the grassroots. Walk into your school and tell them, sorry, but I don't want my kids to grow up viewing the world through the lens of an oppressor and an oppressed, of always looking for something and someone to blame for life's problems, of being a victim who thinks it's normal to just be dependent upon government and not have to contribute anything to the world. Nothing is worse for our kids' mental health and well-being than that mindset. And nothing is worse for our country. Parents from the Loudoun County in the US state of Virginia have told their county's schools board that they want critical theory banned.
In the words of Martin Luther King Jr., I have a dream that my four little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Now I have a dream that we will implement love, not hate, or supporting another Jim Crow's agenda. CRT is not an honest dialogue. It is a tactic that was used by Hitler and the Ku Klux Klan on slavery very many years ago to dumb down my ancestors so we could not think for ourselves. CRT is racist. It is abusive. It discriminates against one's color. Let me educate you. An honest dialogue does not oppress. An honest dialogue does not implement hatred or injustice. It's to communicate without deceiving people. Today, we don't need your agreement. We want action and a backbone for what we asked for today, to ban CRT. We don't want your political advertisement to divide our children or belittle them. Think twice before you indoctrinate such racist theories. You cannot tell me what is or is not racist. Look at me. I had to come down here today to tell you to your face that we are coming together and we are strong. This will not be the last. Greet and meet respectfully.
And that's just one mother from Loudoun County in the US state of Virginia telling their county public schools board that they want Marxist critical theory banned, or at least taught as just one worldview held by a small number of academics from the left, rather than being taught as some kind of universal truth about the way the world really is. Perhaps the most ominous warning came from this mum, though. She grew up in China under Mao's brutal Cultural Revolution in the 60s, and that led to the murder of tens of millions of people by their own government.
I've been very alarmed about what's going on in our school. You are now training our children to be social justice warriors and to loathe our country and our history. Growing up in Mao's China, all this seemed very familiar. The communist regime used the same critical theory to divide people. The only difference is they use class instead of race. This is indeed the American version of the Chinese Cultural Revolution. The critical race theory has its roots in cultural Marxism. It should have no place in our schools.
Mrs. Shi later appeared on Sean Hannity's show on America's Fox News channel. She spoke about her time in school as a kid with posters hung in hallways and teachers and students attacking each other for being ideologically impure.
I just want to let the American people know that what's going on in our school and in our country is really a replay of the Cultural Revolution in China. And I want people to see there's similarities, and the similarities are terrifying. They use the same ideology and same methodology, even the same vocabulary, and with the same goal. The ideology is cultural Marxism, and we were divided into groups as oppressor and oppressed. And here we use race, and there they use class. And the people here who have a different review were labeled racist. But in the Cultural Revolution, the label is counter-revolutionary. So it is a hat that fits all. And once the hat is on your head, your life is ruined. And the methodology is also very similar. It's cancel culture. We basically cancel the whole Chinese civilization pre-communism. And we changed our school names, street names, store names. We changed even our personal names. My name is Xi, and I was named after the city I was born, Xi'an. Xi means west. It also refers to the imperialism. So I wanted so bad to change my name because I want to be more communist. I'm glad my parents convinced me not to. And the vocabulary is even the same, wokeness. And to be specific, we used class wokeness. In Chinese, it is 阶级觉悟. Your level of wokeness determine your chance to get promotion or to get benefit. And who decides your level of wokeness? It is the party leaders. The freedom is fragile, and we can lose it any time if we don't defend it. And there's a lot of Chinese Americans who have the same experience and share my point of view. And I know that more and more people will step up and share their stories and tell the American people critical race theory is not anti-racism. It itself is racist. It's divisive, it's destructive, and it is dangerous.
That's Xi Van Fleet with extremely wise words and an ominous warning for us all there. Xi Van is a Chinese American who spoke out at the Virginia School Board hearings against critical race theory earlier this month. Former Deputy Prime Minister John Anderson has a terrific Conversations podcast, and I've been wanting to tell you about this particular interview for a while, but we just haven't had time on the show to do so. A couple of months ago, John sat down with Australian historian Dr. Stephen Chavura to talk about something that isn't spoken about enough in our schools and universities these days, and that is the history of Western civilization. These days, teachers and social science academics at uni seem more concerned with teaching kids the myths, and they are myths, of critical theory, the Marxist idea that history can be viewed solely through the lens of the oppressed and the oppressor, as if there was never any good in mankind, and as if we never had rulers and leaders who acted nobly sometimes, and as if history hasn't evolved slowly over centuries of trial and error to bring us to the world and societies we enjoy today. Dr. Stephen Chavura teaches European and Australian history at Campion College in Sydney. Before that, he was a lecturer in sociology and political philosophy at numerous universities. Dr. Chavura says contemporary representations of Western history are often misleading. He's recently released a new book called The Forgotten Menzies, the mind of Australia's longest-serving Prime Minister. John Anderson first asked him why he finds history so fascinating.
It was in my first year at university in the late 90s when one of my lecturers, it might even have been the very first lecture or tutorial I attended, and he looked at us all and he said, "You are all hundreds of years old." And I thought, well, that's very strange. And what he meant is that we as human beings are not just biological creatures. I mean, biologically, I'm 41 years old, but there is more to my identity, and there is more that goes into explaining how I live my life and how I think than my biology. And in actual fact, I have imbibed ideas that I myself did not create, that I'm not responsible for, but predate me hundreds and hundreds of years. And also, I have been born into a pre-existing society with pre-existing institutions, with pre-existing philosophical ideas that justify those institutions that, again, I myself did not create, but have to a large extent shaped me and have been themselves evolving over thousands of years. And so what really sort of came home to me was this idea that if I really want to understand myself, I need actually to understand the origins of the institutions and the practices and the ideas that I was born into that have so shaped me. And so for me, one of the most important things about history is that it's actually a journey of self-discovery, and anyone who wants to understand who they are must take some interest in history.
What sets Dr. Shavura apart from many other scholars is that he focuses on what makes and what has made Australia successful historically, rather than on the negatives of Australian history that critical theorists seem to be obsessed with in their endless quest for injustice and an oppressor to blame for all of life's woes.
I think one of the best things one of my students ever told me was a young man who came up to me after I'd taught a course on Australian history at where I currently teach at Campion College in Sydney. And he said, Dr. Shavura, he said, I loved Australia before I took your class, but now that after taking your class, I love Australia even more. And I don't run my Australian history classes to create sort of little nationalists. That's not the reason. But I think what he was getting at, and what I try to do, is just show how the unique and historical oddities of Australian history really explain why we are the country that we are today. And in terms of sort of major forces that historically kind of explain why Australians are the way they are, quite pragmatic, often quite fast to look to the government to solve our problems, and quite egalitarian. Our egalitarianism was noticed ruefully and bemoaned even as early as the 19th century by Europeans who came over and found that they weren't treated like they were back in Europe. I think three things really come to mind, and that is the fact that the original people who came to Australia in the late 18th and early 19th century were not Australians. This is something that I tell my students in the very first lecture. Australia was not settled by Australians. Australia was settled by the British. The people who came to Australia in 1788 had British minds, and they brought with them the ideas of the British Enlightenment, which meant tremendous respect for the rule of law and a respect for the role that religion plays in any stable, civilized society. So that was something that had tremendous influence on the Australian civil order. The other thing that's had a huge impact in Australia is, of course, what the great Geoffrey Blainey, who you've interviewed, called the tyranny of distance. The fact that Australia was so far from any European civilization at the time, and the fact that the Australian continent is so huge and generally very sparsely populated, meant that there were certain things that the government had to do because they couldn't be done by private enterprise. And those things included the building of churches. So up until and throughout the first half of the 19th century, colonial governments helped to build churches, helped to pay clergy, because there just weren't enough people living together for the most part to put their money together and voluntarily build these things. And so the government had to build churches. The government had to build railways from the mid-19th century onwards, where in other countries they were being built by private entrepreneurs. Government was also distributing land early on to convicts, and that brings us to sort of the third really unique factor, convictism, which gave Australia a strong egalitarian and anti-authoritarian tendency. And I think the Irish Catholics also brought that. But the other thing with convictism is that it accelerated Australia's path to democracy, not just because we had a kind of egalitarian streak in our culture from early on, but because after land was given to the convicts it turned out embarrassingly to be the case that when the vote was introduced, when the vote was introduced to elect people to legislative councils in New South Wales, because a lot of ex-convicts had land and had made money over the years, they actually could afford the vote, and good sort of upstanding, God-fearing Scots and English and Welsh who came over couldn't. And so the great fear was that it would be a convict-dominated legislative assembly. And so basically the franchise in the 1850s was brought down so low that pretty much all men could vote, basically making a democracy out of all the colonies by the end of the 1850s.
Fascinating stuff we weren't taught at school, and I'm pretty sure kids today aren't being properly taught at school or university for that matter. Dr. Stephen Shavura, he teaches European and Australian history at Campion College in Sydney. Before that, a lecturer in sociology and political philosophy at numerous universities. Speaking there to Deputy Prime Minister John Anderson on his excellent podcast, Conversations with John Anderson. Now, if you get forced at work into a critical race or gender theory training under the guise of diversity and inclusion training, that is where you need to put your foot down. Politely and firmly call it out. Ask, what's the academic theory behind this training program? What's the research behind that idea? You can say, doesn't this reflect neo-Marxist critical theory? And isn't that just one worldview and a very hotly disputed one? These are all questions and phrases you can use to stand up at work without getting yourself into too much trouble. The other tactic is to just turn it back on them. Ask questions like these. My heritage is partly X and partly Y. Which part of me would be the more racist part, do you think? And how do you suggest I deal with this internal conflict? If you're mixed race like me, that's a beauty. The key is to stay calm, because these HR robots value politeness above all else. The Chinese communists share that view, and they call it maintaining harmony. We'll lock you up and maybe even shoot you if we disagree with you, but out here, in public, we like to maintain harmony. And it's similar in the modern corporate world. It's unprofessional to lose your cool and express genuine frustration and anger. Now, of course, if it isn't justified, I guess it is unprofessional to express too much frustration or anger. But not when it's justified. When it's justified, it's important that you express your anger and frustration if that's the way that you feel, and you should have the right to. Anyway, on that note, we will finish off this week with this clever woman who made a little skit for TikTok.
Welcome to the Diversity and Inclusion Re-Education Camp. Class. It's a class. Good morning. I see here you're white. Actually, my genealogy doesn't matter. What matters is your skin looks white. Step 1, admit that you are a racist. But I'm not racist. Arguing with me just proves that you are one. What? If you won't admit that you're a racist, then you're a racist. So either way, I'm a racist. You're getting it so good. You're a smart one. Step 2, become anti-racist. Of course I'm anti-racist. I am against racism. Oh, no, that's not good enough. You must admit your personal guilt. Wait, what? Your personal guilt against people of color. Guilt of what? Privilege and oppression. Centuries of it. I'm not guilty of that. Your very existence is privileged, therefore oppressive. It's not your personal actions or your character that made you guilty. It's your skin color. But no one is guilty just because of their skin color. Nothing else matters. But saying that is racist. That's impossible. It says here, racism can absolutely not occur against white people. It's a one-way street. It's ignoring a lot of history. You know what? Let's just skip to the end here. It says here, there's actually nothing you can do to make up for being white. You'll always be a racist colonizer and oppressor. Wow, you're evil, really. You should hate yourself. Not even one word of that is true. Whew, I think we're done for today. Don't you just feel so united? No.
And that is it for episode 43 of The Other Side. I'm Damien Curry. Please remember to click that subscribe button on all the platforms. There'll be another episode in a couple of days. And if you're following us on YouTube, click the bell, a little bell thing, so you get notified when we post our new content. It'll send you a little notification saying there's new content from Discernible and there's new content from The Other Side. And sign up for the Discernible crew at discernible.io, because you never know with big tech these days. It's the most bizarre business, because they do everything they can to make you feel unwelcome and to see if they can do everything they can to not help you get a following if you have conservative content. So it's the weirdest business environment to operate in, I've got to tell you. But do sign up for the Discernible crew at discernible.io. And if you'd like to be added to our VIP WhatsApp group for The Other Side, all you've got to do is email me your WhatsApp number. And our email address is theothersideost@gmail.com. Theothersideost@gmail.com. Then I'll send you a link, and you can take that link, click on it, and you'll be added, and it'll take you straight into our little private VIP WhatsApp group. So you never miss an episode, and we can bypass big tech. All right, we'll see you again soon.